Page 251 of The Unfolding is the story of Walker Hayes.
For once in my life, I wasn't going, man, I need a better childhood. Man, I need a hit song. I was looking in the mirror going, if something doesn't rescue you from you, this life is it's going to be miserable. There's no hope. So there you have broken atheists going, I need Savior from me, not anybody else, nothing else. I need rescuing from me.
God's story has been unfolding.
Since the beginning of time.
He invites you to be a part of it.
Wow. Another page in The Unfolding.
Hey, this is Meredith Foster. Walker Hayes was an alcoholic and an atheist. His career was stalling, his family was struggling, and by his own admission, his life was falling apart. The last thing he wanted was a sermon, but what he couldn't ignore was a pastor named Craig. Craig didn't preach at Walker. He just kept showing up with years of kindness, friendship, generosity that slowly began to crack open Walker's hard heart. And one day, Craig gave Walker a gift so unexpected that it forced him to consider a question he never thought he would ask. What if Jesus really is who he says he is? Today, Walker is a successful country artist known for his hit song, Fancy Like, about a date night with his wife at Applebee's. But behind the music is a much deeper story, a story of rebellion and friendship. It includes the heartbreaking loss of a child, so be advised as you listen. But ultimately, this is a story about redemption and how Walker found his way to faith.
The faith part of my early childhood, I don't ever remember not hearing, about God, about Jesus. I was a vacation Bible school kid. My dad was an ex-music minister. And so I knew him as a real estate agent, but he had been a music minister for the Baptist church his whole life. With that came just an incredible passion for music. I mean, my father sang everywhere. I mean, if we were in line at Cracker Barrel, he would just, this is a new Christmas morning. He would just belt it. And honestly, you would think, were you embarrassed? And I was like, it's all I knew. I mean, that's just what my dad, even my friends, they just knew that's Charles Hayes singing so loud 5 rows back. If the door was open at Spring Hill Baptist Church, my family was there. Now, I will tell you the unfortunate part of any of that is that I was a bad kid. I was hyper, restless, rambunctious. I was the last of 9 siblings, 9 kids total, and I was just unruly. I mean, my identity, especially as I got in those preteen years, was acting out, rebelling. As an early child, or young child, I was very harshly disciplined when my parents would leave me. They would be in choir practice and I would be kept with this group. And if I ran in church, if we ran outside or if we said something wrong, there was this old lady my mom would pick me up and she would whisper in my mom's ear what I had done wrong. And then I was taken home and then disciplined. I didn't really help myself out. It was like, why can't you just be this? And I would be the other thing. This was a bad kid. That's the only way I know how to say it.
Did that start to create resentment in you?
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, there's still moments, even now. I mean, I'm 45 and I wake up and I go, that's another lie, where I go, hey, have mercy on my parents. I'm a parent myself. Do not sit here. You do no good not having mercy and blaming your parents for any of these wounds, these scars, the physical, whatever, But I loved music. I'm not sure I was necessarily secure enough, growing up to do it in the environment I did. I was an athlete. Back then, my team would rail me, if I ever had a solo in the choir, something like that. It was humiliating. And even if I enjoyed it, and so there was that like going back and forth, but I just wasn't a great kid. I mean, I started drinking really early. I started drinking at 13. It filled a insecure, awkward developmental age where you're just You're so afraid of everything, you just want to fit in. And then you take a sip and there's courage, there's literally courage in a bottle and bravery and just confidence. And it's not, but it felt like it. So that met me at a very dangerous age where it became a crutch. It became a blanket, a cape, if you will, like a Superman cape. But, my parents, they were older parents. And so, I think they were tired. They had me when they were almost 45. And so, I had an interesting childhood and an interesting relationship with church. There was some crazy stuff that happened. We actually had, and I don't really know, I'm no therapist, so I don't know how to articulate what this affected, but there was a youth, not pastor, but like someone who worked with the youth very closely, who was a pediatrician. I loved this guy, and honestly, I wonder about him a lot. Like, where is he now? But he had some problems, and he was abusing kids. That was recognized and found out. Like, it was an investigation, at my church, and that was confusing. I was never physically affected, but in my mind, as a young man, I just was like, I think church for me growing up, sadly, and again, I'm not looking at my childhood church casting I'm not condemning, but I will admit it was not the safest place for me growing up. I felt that way. When I think about the church that I think God intended to build on Peter, the rock, I feel like there's an intended safety. There's like this unconditional realm of like safe that I would like to feel, that I feel like we should feel. And I couldn't wait to leave that environment. It was very formal church. It was very, did you have your suit on? It was a Southern Baptist upbringing. That's the only way I know how to describe it. I feel like the way I just said that sounded really heavy and negative. There were fun nights. I have friends that I grew up with still to this day, and the friendships are valuable. There are mentors that were awesome. And I learned how to sing. I mean, that place was filled with beautiful music.
When did you realize that you were maybe kind of good at singing? I mean, obviously.
I'm still wondering, Meredith. I mean, and honestly, I mean that with all my heart. Like, I am not being humble right now by any means. I'm going to be honest here. I feel like God has given me a gift He's given me a passion for writing songs. The singing part, I can do it. I do my own thing. I have a style. I mean, are there better singers with more angelic voices? Yes. And I love to sing, a lot like my father. I love it. I want to sing all day, but I love to write more. That's my gift.
When did you figure that out? When did you write your first song?
Well, yeah, I was late. I mean, honestly, in retrospect, I can see now where the Lord was putting me growing up, and it all makes sense looking back. But my wife and I actually met in a school play that I was terrified of being in. I had a choir teacher who put me in that play, and he was very, very kind. His name is Mr. Powell. And I credit him for me and Lainey meeting, and being together. And I loved it. I loved being in that play, but I never would have told my friends that I loved being in that play. And then I went to college with Lainey. This is crazy. I took a piano lesson the summer of my sophomore year, and I changed my major from biology to piano. Made no sense to anyone. I told you, I'd grown up around music. My church was filled with music. There was a piano in every room, at the church. So I knew Heart and Soul and all what's that song? Walking in Memphis. I knew some of that stuff, but I'd never really taken a lesson from a guy, like someone who, could teach. And I took a lesson and just loved it. You know how I told you alcohol met me? the pensive sitting at a piano alone, practicing, it just met me where I was. Kind of like taking a long run every day. Just sitting there in the notes and just spending time in a practice room. I asked that professor, I said, hey, can I finish on time and major in music with emphasis on piano? And he said, if you double up a few semesters, you should be fine. And so I changed my major. It made sense to no one, except my father. My father, he could understand. My mom was like, I don't know what's going on here. But so I majored in piano with no intention to do it, for an occupation. I came home after college. Lainey and I got engaged, and my dad booked me a gig at a bar. He was at a restaurant off Dauphin Island Parkway one random night, and he called me and he said, I asked the manager if you could play here on Friday night, and she said yes. I was furious. I couldn't believe he had signed me up without asking me. I was 22 years old. I played that gig, and that's when I decided to move to Nashville. It's as crazy as it sounds, Meredith.
Just like that. One night, one
Lainey
gig.
and I were engaged. She thought I was going to sell real estate. So did her parents. We were going to live in Mobile. I called her when we left that gig, and I said, hey, you want to move to Nashville? I want to try to do the singing, the artist, whatever thing. I remember having dinner with her parents, and they were not excited. They were just so confused. They saw it all. They saw the future. They were like, oh, you're going to live down the street. You're going to work for your dad. You're going to be fine. You're going to be successful. We're going to have grandkids down the street. And then I dropped that bomb on them. Then I said, no, turns out we're going to move to Nashville. I have no security. I have no plan. I have no 401k. We're just going to move to Nashville. And what are you going to do? I'm going to try to sing. Actually, Lainey's dad, literally that night when we had dinner and I broke them the news, he said, do you sing in front of people? And I said, I literally, as a kid, honestly, no joke, looked him in the face and I said, I don't really yet, but I will, when I get there. And so, of course, even honestly, when I tell the story, every time I tell the story, I just think in my brain, oh my goodness, we just had no clue. Lainey was up for it as if she believed in me. She wasn't startled or surprised. She just was like, let's go. So we went, we found an apartment, we left our honeymoon and drove to Nashville.
What was your plan once you got there?
I didn't have one. I mean, we literally, we came, I knew one person. My dad had a friend who had a son here. And I met with him. Thank goodness I was able to land a job, not music related. I was a booking agent for motivational speakers in Franklin, Tennessee. That got us a house. I had steady enough income to get us a loan. So we had a house. And then within a year, we were pregnant with our first daughter. I was playing open mic nights and falling in love. It was then is when I wrote my first song. You asked that question a long time ago, and I never got around to this. I wrote my first song in the fall of 2004 because we visited the Bluebird Cafe and I heard songwriters. They sang the songs they had written, and I was blown away. As a matter of fact, I showed up at the Bluebird and I put my name in a hat in an open mic night to sing cover songs. And I was embarrassed because I realized you don't sing cover songs at the Bluebird. You sing songs you've written. And so I left. We left before they called my name. I was too scared. And then I went home and wrote a song and then came back the next week and sang it. And that was the first song I'd ever written.
So
23.
So first of all, it's obvious that you have a gift. And in now, of course, hearing so many of the songs that you've written, it seems like it comes naturally to you. So it's not totally shocking. But to hear that was the first time you wrote a song, that's not a Nashville story that you hear.
No, that was a lie. You talk about lies that you hear. I was definitely scared in this massive ocean of Nashville, and everybody I would meet, they had been wanting to write songs since they were 9. ideas in their journals since they were 11, and they had been singing in front of people since they were 5. And here I was, 23, almost about to be a dad. I'm just barely digging in. But I tell you what, I mean, I started writing in 2004, and you're kind to encourage, I appreciate you talking about my gift, but I'm being 100% honest here. I've written thousands and thousands of songs. I mean, there's a lot more bad ones than there are good ones. I'm not sure sometimes if the gift is the gift or is the gift just the desire, just the love. I truly feel fortunate to be someone. I mean, I'm 45 and I still wake up excited to write a song like I'm 10 years old and I just figured it out today, and I do think that's rare. And so I'm grateful to God that I have that youthful it's like seeing Niagara Falls for the first time every day. I am blessed with the 110% desire to create every day. And honestly, I think that's what's kind of carried me or kind of pinballed me through this industry,
So it seemed like you were going to be an overnight success, right? Pretty quickly you got, overnight success in terms of you got signed, you were writing. Is that right? Is that how it
a
worked?
lot of people overlook, the first 8 years of my career. I got a publishing deal fast. A friend of mine drove me downtown, introduced me to some publishers and producers, and they all three wanted to sign me. They were like, they said, you look the part, you sound the part, you write the part, let's go. We can make some money. And then those endeavors would fail. I got signed by Mercury. I got dropped by Mercury Records. I got signed by Capitol Records. 4 years later, I get dropped by Capitol Records. And that is a common story you hear in Nashville is I got signed, I got picked up by the major label. These people invested, these people wanted to book me, this person wanted to manage me. Nothing beyond that. It ended, I went home. I probably should have gone home 5 or 6 times, but I was proud. The last thing I wanted to do was drive back to Mobile and tell all those naysayers that they were right. And honestly, I say that, I think I was just too busy thinking about the next song, I wanted to write. It really was just this genuine, naive love. I never thought about giving up until I noticed that my dream confused me in that I couldn't decide whether it was positively affecting my kids or negatively. I would look at Lainey and I would go, here's this beautiful woman who's been with me since I was 17. I mean, I've known this girl since I was 16. She was 17, and I want to provide for her. I want to take care of her. But we don't have any nice anything. There's no one outside of us looking at us going, well, that's the American dream right there. You just gave her the world, and again, Meredith, that's a lie. Who cares? You know what I mean? Like, you don't need those things to be happy, but that was a lie. That was weighing heavily on my dream. And then, I'm looking at my kid. It's very much like that Greatest Showman movie. I'm looking at my kids and I'm going, man, my daughter I can't do those lessons. She wants to be a gymnast, but we only afford one to do gymnastics. And we have a birthday coming up, and I'm like, we do dollar store birthday. We go to the dollar store, we do like $20 of streamers and plates and a toy, and we're like, that's it. And again, what's crazy is that's awesome. That's amazing. You're happy.
I know.
You have joy. You're hugging your kid. You love your kid. Your kid loves you. That in itself is a miracle, but you kind of don't see it in this culture we live in. You always see, well, that girl, she had her party at Chuck E. Cheese and she got to invite people. And, my kids they're kind of looking next door and they're like, wow, Dad, these people have 3 cars. Why do we have 1? And honestly, my kids, they're fine with it. But again, I start looking at my dream and I go, and again, mind you, at this point, I'm an atheist. I'm not praying to God. I'm just looking at it for a surface value. Reality is just this life. just one life that we get. And I'm going, okay, how do I just be the best dad I can? I want to heap only good stuff onto my kids for their futures. Does that mean me keeping on doing this dream so they look back and they go, no, I'm never giving up? Or do they need to see their dad go, no, he chose me, not his dream. He put his dream aside to pay for my baseball glove. And so I didn't really know, and I don't know if there's a right and wrong. Even now, as I tell this story, I'm kind of like, there's some honor in both, it's like, I don't really know. And then I would write a song about it, which would always make me laugh. I'd be like, well, that's funny. The irony is, I'm like, do I need to give this up? Do I not? And I'm like, oh, that's a great song idea, and I would write it on my hand, while I was working at Costco.
Oh, let's talk about that. Yeah. One of the stories I read in your book is about, I think it was when Capital dropped you and you lost the van lease. If you'll just tell that, where you worked and how you ended up working at Costco. Those two things I think really just capture kind of where your family was at. You had more kids by this point.
Yeah. So when I was signed at Capital, I was blessed with a dealership endorsement for a minivan. They saw here's this artist. He signed, professional recording artist, singer guy. He has kids. Let's loan him a minivan. And then everybody, he will sell minivans for it. So that was awesome. We got a van. When I got dropped from Capital, I kept that a secret because I knew they're going to want this van back. Well, they eventually found out, and they did. They took the van back, and they were so kind, and they didn't want to take the van back, but business is business. So they came and got the van, and I remember my kids and I and Lainey watching them pull the van on the truck. And for my kids, it was like a theme park. They were like, oh, that's amazing. How did they get the van on the truck? And I was like, well, that's kind of a light in this darkness. They got to see the coolest thing ever. And I'm thinking, well, I don't know what I'm going to do now. We have 6 kids and a Honda Accord that's old, and nasty. So actually I was playing Puckett's Boathouse one Wednesday night. My career is non-existent. We're going into negative territory here. Like it's nothing is happening for me. And there's this young man in the front row. Him and his wife are sitting there loving the show. And for whatever reason, this guy is a diehard fan. He's like my one fan in life right now. And he knows words to songs that I don't even have out yet. I guess he saw them on socials or whatever. And he's singing along. And I take a break. And I'm like, I got to meet this guy. Well, I went up and met him. And he and I hit it off. And turns out he works at Costco in the tire center. And it was very embarrassing. I mean, it was embarrassing because here's a guy, he wanted my autograph. He wanted a picture. He couldn't believe that we were sitting at the table together. And I'm thinking, man, I need some overnight hours. Like, can you put in a good word for me at Costco? And I hated to break this kid's heart because I was big stuff to him. And he was an artist too. And I said, man, I'll give you my autograph if you'll put in a good word for me at Costco. And so he did. And within 2 weeks of that conversation, I got to be in the produce department stocking. And I was insured. The benefits were amazing. Salary, the hourly thing was what it was, like $11 an hour, but it was a job and it got us through a little phase in life where we needed that.
So now you're in the season where this is probably when those late night wonderings of like, do I keep pursuing this dream or should I give it up? Because now you've got 6 kids, a Honda Accord, you're working at Costco, you're still songwriting and still doing all that kind of stuff. Is this where Craig enters the picture?
Yeah. So Craig, when we were playing those Puckett's Boathouse gigs, I would do those every Wednesday. And honestly, I did those because they fed our family. At that time, we eat a lot. We got a big family. Craig is at this church. Now, Craig's wife, Laura, meets my wife, and Laura invited her to a church. Now, at this point in our life, Lainey and I don't have a lot of disagreements. We're kind of just, I don't know, you probably compare us to kind of like a hippie family. Like we're one car, 6 kids, none of their clothes match. They're all dirty, like we're a mess. We didn't fight about a lot of things. We didn't fight about money because we didn't have any, but there was tension as far as like our beliefs were concerned, because there is no God. Like I wasn't an angry atheist, like trying to throw it in anybody's face or anything, but I just was like, no, I think this just is what it is. Lainey was a believer. She was a Christian. She would put the kids to bed and tell them the story of Daniel in the lion's den or what, and I'd be like, well, this is what I think. And so we would have some disagreements there. So when Lainey was invited to this church, needless to say, I was very sarcastic. Lainey and I, over our 15 years in Nashville, she had tried, to visit churches here and there, and it just wasn't my thing. I went along. But at this point in our life, I was kind of excited that maybe we didn't have to do that anymore. And so I wasn't excited when she was like, yeah, I'd like to go to this church that Laura invited us to. And that's where we met Craig. It was a Saturday night. I was hammered. I mean, I drank, all this story that I'm telling you about. I drank sun up to sundown. I was a functional alcoholic. And so on Saturday, by 6 p.m., I mean, I'm pretty lit. I got a steady buzz going, and so I ride shotgun to this church, and I loved holding the infant. That was kind of my, I had learned that if you hold the baby, no one really, especially if they're asleep, you can be like, she's asleep, and you don't have to do the whole, what do you do? Well, I'm a songwriter. Have you written anything that I know? And you're like, no, I haven't. I have nothing that's made money. I have nothing that some famous person has sung. So you're pretty sorry you asked, right? Because we don't have anything to talk about now. So I had this like Nashville induced chip on my shoulder. And so, yeah, I was just kind of an island, with the baby. And so we walk in, and man, Craig just beelines for me, and he just shakes my hand so hard. And his enthusiasm is crazy. It's just alarming. It's like, whoa. And there was only like 30 people at this church. And he just kept saying, man, I am glad you're here. Walker, I am so glad, you brought your family. And I was thinking, I didn't bring my family. Lainey brought me, I feel like one of the kids. It was interesting because he knew where my beliefs were. He knew I reeked of alcohol. I'm a hoodie guy. So if you drink all day, you just reek. He knew all these things that were just wall, like here's Jesus and here's a wall and here's Walker. And he knew that, but was still just like, hey man, I'm so glad, knocking on the door, just saying, hey, I'm glad you're here. We kind of hit it off just as buddies. I think we went out to dinner that night. And honestly, I was excited about the 2-for-1s at this Mexican restaurant. And I was like, they're pleasant. They're not like trying to make me have a Bible study at dinner. And, Craig's not texting me verses and trying to convince me of anything. He's just around. That's the way it was with Craig and Laura for the next 4 years, 4 or 5 years. I don't know how to say it in any other way except at that point in our life, no one showed up for us. And that was, I'm not pointing at people. We were not inviting. We were happy, isolated. We were wounded, but we were a cactus. And everybody else did not want to get near us. And that, they were wrong and we were wrong. But Craig and Laura, they just came close and they stayed and they just joined us in a life that a lot of people disapproved of, couldn't make sense of, probably didn't want to be near us. And that, I got to tell you, when you don't love you and you don't want anyone else's love, when someone else does love you and you can't understand it, it's kind of life-changing. And it takes a second to be okay. If you don't want that and you have some reason, like you got some hurt in your past, it takes a minute to go, I think Craig just unconditionally loves me. I I've never tasted that. And it kind of makes you mad. Like some days you're like, quit it. Why you gotta love me? And then some days you're like, wow, he just loves us. I don't know. It's Christ. Honestly, it's Christ. Christ was loving on us through Craig, and it was like nothing I'd ever experienced. And sometimes it infuriated me, and sometimes it invited me. All I know is just it was doing something to me. There were nights where I left Craig's house with a buzz, riding shotgun in our car, and I said, why does Craig and Laura love us so much? And honestly, every time, this is crazy, every time I say that sentence, I almost cry. And I'm a grown man, and I hate crying in public. But to me, that sentence right there, just, if everybody in the world would just stop for a second, we can all say that about Jesus Christ, the Son of the living God of the universe. And that is emotional. That is blinding love. That is unfathomable, unreasonable, not make sensible on this side of heaven love. And that is what you can experience soul to soul on this earth. It's not heaven. Craig's not perfect. I'm not perfect. We still have fight, but that question in itself to me is kind of like, it just sounds like the gospel I think is supposed to feel, is just that it's the first commandment. It's just love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind, or whatever the wording is. It's how do you not, when you know you and you know Christ knows you, but you know that he can't not love you. You're just like, what? And if you're focused on that, what is everything else? Like you said, what are those lies? Who cares if your mom told you were fat, or your dad looked at you like you weren't enough? Like the Messiah wants your heart. As messed up as it is, that's all he wants. That statement will forever live with me. That's not a question that I don't want to ask that. Especially as an atheist, can you imagine how bad I did not want to look at my believing wife with all this pride and go, why does this Christian guy love me so well? It's almost like, whoops, I just unfolded the whole thing, and it's almost like, I need to get that sentence back. I didn't want to confess in Christ. And so I think that's where it all began. I think just in me making that statement, you can go, dude, something in Walker's heart is getting softer. Something made of stone, it's becoming flesh. There's a heartbeat in there. It's like the Grinch. The heart began to grow, and I'm not sure I was okay with it or proud of it, but Craig's unconditional love did something to us.
That story is such an encouragement to all of us who've been loving somebody over the long haul, and we start to get tired, or we start to feel like giving up. It's such a reminder, just keep going. There was a night when Craig shows up at the baseball field. That is a real pivotal moment for you, even though it was a hard one. I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
No, again, I'm just not a human that was taught in life to ever reach up and ask for help. I was taught to just pull your big boy pants up, rub some dirt on it, and do life. Take responsibility for your lot in life, where you are. You had a lot to do with where you are. Only you can get yourself out of that jam. And so when Craig shows up at one of my baseball games, one very discovering fact, Craig knew that we just had one car. And I did not walk around telling people when my situations got worse. I tended to want to hide that, shove it under a rug, or just fix it and move on. So I had obviously trusted Craig enough to say, yeah, man, we play this red light game where, if there's a cop nearby, I say, cop, and my kids dive down into the floorboard because I don't have enough seatbelts. But we have to get to the show to get food, And so it's like, y'all have to ride in this Honda. We all have to ride together. And so Craig knew that. And him and his wife, Laura, at this time in their life, they're check to check, just like we are. Craig is a bivocational pastor. He's working in tech sales, but he's also preaching. And he figures, hey, we need to just gift them the van in our garage. So Craig shows up at a baseball game, one of my son's games, unannounced. And he gets out of his van and he's got the keys and the title to it. And he says, man, all you have to do is sign this paper. I've done all the paperwork. All you got to do is sign, and this van belongs to you. You can leave in this van. And I got to tell you, I wish I had been grateful. I wish I had cried. I wish I had hugged the man. But I was so embarrassed. I was furious. I couldn't believe, he had put me on the spot like that, in front of my family, in front of my friends. I mean, it got pretty uncomfortable for everyone around. But eventually my daughter said, Dad, just take the van. And I did. I very sarcastically, bro, thanks. We'll give it back to you, as soon as we don't need it. Tried to just lessen the gift and lessen my need, But man, Meredith, as I drove home, I looked in the rear view, and for the first time in a really long time, my kids were buckled up safely. Man, you talk about just a clear illustration of, wow, we were not doing so great. And this guy relieved a burden that I'm probably going to be realizing over the next week and month and year to come. He rescued my kid. I mean, he saved them with those seatbelts. It was just very clear. It's kind of like when somebody helps you, and then when they help you is when you realize how much you were hurting. That's what happened to me that night. And again, more territory in my heart becoming tender and just stone to flesh, just piece, little segment by segment. And that night was a big chunk where I was like, okay, what's going on here?
Craig's gift left Walker asking, why would anyone love us like this? He wasn't ready to admit it, but his heart of stone was starting to crack. And what happened next changed everything.
I didn't go home that night and read the Bible or turn to Jesus or, say a prayer. This is how good God has been to me, honestly, is I'll let you know a little bit of my church history. If you'd have said to me then, that night, what's going to turn you to Christ? If anything, what would turn you to Jesus? I would have said something amazing, not some bivocational pastor who is a church, just kind of your classic Christian. I would have told you, not a Christian. A Christian's not going to turn me to Jesus. And then I think at that point, I was beginning to look at Craig and I was beginning to go, he's human. He's a dude just like me. He has undergone something that is supernatural. There is something different about Craig. It's not earthly perfection. He's not a Superman. He's not the Messiah, but he might actually have a relationship with Jesus. This Jesus that he is showing me with his love. I've never met that Jesus before. And again, might not have been able to articulate that night, but you can hear it in a song that I wrote to Craig. First and foremost, at that point in my life, I didn't know a lot of people where I said, hey, I'd like to write a song about this person. But I just started writing this song about Craig. And again, I'm an atheist. I shared it with Laney, kind of the first verse. And I was like, is this weird? And again, I think that was the Holy Spirit compelling, using my gifts and desires to encourage someone. I didn't know it then. I just would have said, I just want to write a song today. And I just can't stop thinking about Craig and the fact that he gave us a van. And I have never been loved this side of heaven so genuinely by someone, not even family. The song explains, this dude's different. He's not your typical kid from Sunday school, right? And then it says, he can't walk on water or turn at Napa Valley red, but he just might be tight with somebody that did those things. It's kind of wild, when I sing that, to think back and go, that was an atheist, Walker, kind of explaining the gospel the only way I knew how. If you check out that song, it's about Jesus. It never says Jesus, but it is kind of the gospel. It's Christ living in Craig and me not being able to comprehend what's going on. It's wild, too. The song, I didn't know this, but the first version of that song was 3 minutes and 16 seconds long, John 3:16. And also, I almost didn't even share that song with Craig because I thought it was weird. I was like, is he going is this weird to send Craig a song called Craig? What's he going to think? Like, is he going to be kind of freaked out, But my wife actually sent it to Laura, and Laura pressed play. That was another step in me coming to Christ. There's a verse, they will know we're believers by our love. As a believer myself, you can wake up every day and go, they're going to know I'm a believer by my love today. And you can fail at that miserably. But then you can also not know it. Like you said earlier, you were like encouraging believers. You were saying you never know. Just being with people, they're knowing. They really are. Your attention and just ability to do mundane and stay beside someone for a long amount of time, you have no idea how contradictory to the rest of their life that love is. And I don't even think Craig knew how much his just proximity, his family, them just joining us in life, they didn't know that might have been one of the first genuine feelings of love we'd ever experienced together as a family. And not their preaching, not their prayers, they were just there. It was kind of mind-blowing.
One of the things about your story that I appreciate is the long haul of Craig and Laura's love for you guys, because it's not like even you drove the minivan home that night and that week or month, if I remember correctly, it wasn't like you gave your life to Christ even soon.
No,
it was years after that.
It was years later. Yeah.
But things were starting to change. Like you decided to become sober at one point. Yeah. I don't know where that was in your story.
Yeah, that was at. I just woke up one day, honestly, and again, this I can only say it's a God thing. I'm pretty educated in the stats of recovery. They're not good. Addiction is usually the winner. People rarely get sober and stay sober, regardless of what drug or alcohol you're addicted to, sex, whatever it is. And one day I just woke up. It was in October. I'm actually almost 10 years sober this October. And I had been drinking since I was 13 and I was 35. And I woke up and I just felt like if I did it again, I would die. I woke up on a Saturday. I would have normally just walked to the fridge, cracked open a beer. And I just thought, if I do this today, I'm sick. Something's going to happen. And so one day turned to two, and then two turned to a week, and then a week turned to a month. And before I knew it, I was 3-4 months sober, and I didn't want to go back. I had no desire to feel like that ever again. It's almost as if I detested the thought of alcohol hitting my lips. Like it was very, very miraculous. That's wild.
Did you have any recognition of that at the time, that there was something miraculous or supernatural about it? Or was it just one day at a time?
No, it was just one day at a time. I was not praying about it. I mean, I'm still not a believer, when this happened. But, I am always taking inventory, looking around at my life going, I'm a father. I'm drinking and driving. That probably needs to stop. And so, yeah. But yeah, I'm not a believer at that time.
When you look back over, what was probably the next significant experience for you, which I love the way you described it earlier about those chunks of that heart of stone that you need to break off?
I would say, honestly, my favorite it's not the right word, but the lowest, I would call it the most valuable experience I've been through on earth is the loss of our daughter. A man who generally probably wrongfully prides myself in my ability to carry on, continue, endure, persevere. Look at my career. It's people call this a 10-year town. It took me 20. I probably would have stayed for 40. There was a lot of pride there. And then with our 7th child, Lainey, it's old hat. Sadly, look, it's our 7th kid. I would have said, hey, I can deliver this baby. Like literally have it in the car. We're good. I'll take it home. I know how to cut an umbilical cord. And even Lainey is like, yeah, whatever. When are we going to the doctor? No big deal. Now she goes into labor. She's carried Oakley. We didn't know what it was, but she was pregnant with our 7th, longest pregnancy she's had. She carried Oakley longer than any of them. She goes into labor on a Wednesday. On that Wednesday, I was supposed to play the CMT Awards. So that was my first televised gig. I was so excited. I couldn't wait. I just was like, let me at 'em. We had a song that was top 10 things were going amazing. I'm sober. My family's beautiful. We're paying bills with music. We're having a run of success. Life is good. I'm on the road constantly. I come in, she goes into labor. Something happens at home and we lose the heartbeat. Ambulance rushes Lainey to the hospital. We heard the heartbeat maybe like at 8:30. And then we're at the hospital maybe at 9:15-ish. They had to rush Lainey into surgery, emergency surgery. And I'm in a room, you're very scared, in shock, a lot going on in life. My kids are at home, they're by themselves. And the doctor knocks on this door, and I'm in this room, and I'm dying to see Lainey. I mean, I hate, being away from her and wondering how she is. She's kind of unconscious. The doctor says, hey, it was a girl. We tried to resuscitate for about 20 minutes. We couldn't. It was such an interesting pain. It was like I was so used to it's a girl going with, oh, because we didn't know. It was just such a weird sentence. Like, it's a girl, she's dead. She's not alive. For me, other than losing like a grandparent, the brevity of life, I just never, that happens in you. And as a man, I was clueless. I've never felt so clueless. I was like, well, what do I do? Do I go meet her? Do you hold a not living child? Should we take pictures? I probably need to do this with Lainey, right? Not by myself. I don't want to meet my kid without her and then be like, I met her first, And then the doctor said, and your wife, she's losing blood, rapidly, and we're trying to stop it. And so, they would just shut the door. She was like, I got to get back in there. So I'm in this room. I mean, I can still smell, the hospital, and just thinking, honestly, I kind of went into like selfish shock mode. I mean, I started thinking, if Lainey dies, what do I do to my kid? Like, do they go to school? Who do I ask for help? Do I live in Nashville? The worst scenario is happening. And then back to the kid, I'm like, I want to meet my daughter. I got a new daughter. It was sheer confusion, a lot of anger that I can't really pinpoint. I think I was just frustrated. Like, it wasn't supposed to be. Why is this existence so hard? It took me forever to get here, and then this happened. And again, that was selfish. But eventually, the doctor came in and said, "Hey, look, I don't know how it happened, but your wife stopped bleeding, and you can see her in a few minutes." And it was brutal. I mean, it was the worst day of my life. Lainey slowly came into consciousness. I would explain to her what happened. She would convulse just out of pain. She would wake up and she would tap her stomach. And that meant, what happened? Where's the baby? And I would say, Lainey, it's a girl. She didn't make it. We had a girl and she didn't make it. And then Lainey would she was in pain, but then her body would convulse with tears and she would kind of pass out. And then she would wake up again and go, where's the baby? She wanted to move and she was like strapped down. And honestly, I was just so confused. I was like, do I keep telling her this or do I stop telling her and wait? How long do I wait till I know that she can absorb what I'm saying? And then she would write on this board and ask again and again. And it honestly, it was the most painful day that I hope to God I will experience. May not be, but it was the worst. And then Craig and Laura, they came back, which is a huge, man, you got to know, listen, the fact that I invited them into that moment, that meant something to me. I didn't want anybody's parents around. I didn't want anybody I worked with around. I didn't want to be with anybody, but I asked Craig and Laura to come back, and we passed Oakley around, and we literally, I felt like my bones and my ribs were breaking from moaning, from just the pain, just handing her to Craig and seeing him hold her, and then putting her in Lainey's arms, and Lainey looking at her fingers and her toes and her body and her face, and just, it was like she was beautiful, but just not alive, and it just, there were just moments where I was just like, please open your eye, just because she was perfect. And then we buried her, and Craig did a little service, and it was just my family, Lainey, the kids, Craig and Laura. Disastrous service. I mean, my sons and I buried her. They gave us some shovels, which was so nice. Like, they gave us something to do because we didn't know what to do. You know, you're looking at rocks in the ground, and it's kind of God is merciful that he gives you a hole to dig. I've always thought about that. Like, when someone dies, you just want to do something. You're like, and it's like, well, you got to dig a hole, you know? And so we put, you know, me and my boys put the dirt, you know, we filled it up, the hole, and I almost jumped off the wagon that night. It was a tough, that was probably the worst, you know, the hardest night. But Lainey actually found me an AA meeting that night, and it was definitely a rescue. I guess all that to say, my incompleteness as a person was never more evident than that night. You know, just looking at my wife going, well, I love her more than anything, and I can't make her smile, and I can't fix her. You know, that was the first time in my life where I looked at Lainey and I went, I can't make her laugh, and I felt utterly useless. And I have 6 kids. I can't describe what's happening. I can't help them at all. I can't explain it. I can't tell them what tomorrow looks like. I've got a father-in-law and a mother-in-law who almost lost their daughter. I feel like a failure that I allowed us to get here. Where do I go? And then for a living, I sing, you know, on stage, and I try to bring people joy and provide them with an escape of lightheartedness or relatability. And I can never remember a time where my occupation felt stupider, where I was like, I don't ever want to do that again. That was a waste of time. And so God was so merciful to break, again, back to that heart of stone, big cracks right then. So maybe at that point in my life, I'm not praying and I'm not asking for help because that would be weak in my mind. But I am in the backyard screaming at something up there. And I did, man. I mean, there was one night, I don't know what happened, but it was kind of that point in grief where some people say something and you just want to punch them in the face. You're like, why on earth would you tell me, at least you got 6 kids that are healthy? You know, it's like, I literally want to rip your head off right now. And I don't know what happened, but something happened like that. And I walked outside and I just fell on my knees and I just buried my fist in the driveway and just screamed, you know, just yelled. Because it just felt like the pain and the futility of life was unyielding. It just was so heavy. But again, as a believer, I know that is where Christ dwells. It says in Isaiah, you know, that he's down there with the brokenhearted. Rock bottom is a good, Ray Ortland says as well, you know, that's not a bad place to be because that's where you see. And what was crazy is for once in my life, I wasn't going, man, I need a better childhood. Man, I need a hit song. This person needs to give me a break. I need success. I need to figure out how to do this with my kids. My wife and I need a better marriage. We need a date night. I was looking in the mirror going, if something doesn't rescue you from you, this life it's going to be miserable. There's no hope. If there's not a relationship with the Son of God and he can't cleanse you of your sin, forgive you your sins, rescue you from you. So there you have broken atheists going, I need Savior from me, not anybody else, nothing else. I need rescuing from me. Please be real, Jesus. Please, please, please exist. Please redeem. Please do all this stuff that I've heard you do. And there was a night, I remember I had to get back on the road. I had to return to work. You know, I couldn't quit. I remember there was one night I pleaded with Lainey. I said, Lainey, please tell me someone who is as broken and nasty as me and has actually experienced redemption. And she said, Paul. She said, well, you know, in the Bible, you know, Paul held, I think, look, don't quote me, Paul held Stephen's jacket or when Stephen was getting stoned or somebody was getting stoned and Paul held a jacket while they stoned this guy, a Christian. And then Paul is converted. And then he's the guy, you know, then he writes He's like one of the most read authors of all time, proclaiming the name of Jesus. And I was like, Paul doesn't count, Lainey, because he's in the manual, you know? I was like, give me somebody like me, 2020, whatever it is. A friend had recommended her a book by Rosario Butterfield, and it was called Secrets of an Unlikely Convert. And I devoured this book on the road, on my phone. I got it on Kindle. And the only difference in my testimony and Rosario was that she had surrendered. And you know, I think you can hear from my story that my knee, it was bowing. It was not wanting to bow, but it was closer and closer. And it was painful. I'm sure if you loved me, I'm sure if you're Craig, your heart breaks as you're watching someone like me. You're going, Lord, reveal yourself to this guy who I love because he is just hurting. I see this now as a believer. I see unbelievers that I love. I'm just like, God, please show yourself to this man or this woman. And when I read that book, my knee just hit the ground. And I just realized, I said, I got an option. My knee can bow or there's nothing else. I've done it all. There's nothing else. And so I snuck into a bookstore the next morning. I bought a Bible and literally roared through it. I'm just every morning woke up with the sun, hid the Bible for a while because I didn't want to tell, I didn't want to go up to Lainey and go, you're right. And I didn't want to go to Craig. I didn't want to go to Craig and go, bro, me too. Eventually I did. And praise God, none of them, they were only joyful. Not one believer looked at me and said, I told you so. I actually told Craig that I surrendered my life to Christ in a sushi restaurant, and we celebrated, and I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. I just said, Craig, I got to tell you something, and I'm nervous, but I believe it all, And he said, do you believe that Jesus is the Son of God and that you want to give your life to him and you want him to live, inside? And I was like, yes, exactly that, Craig. And he went to the bathroom and he probably sang a worship song because that's how Craig is. But I think the proclamation of it to my friend Craig, I can only say that was probably what I would consider my birthday, my Jesus birthday. But yeah, that was it.
It's been several years since Walker found his way to faith in Jesus. Since then, Walker and Craig wrote a book about their experience, and it goes into much more detail. It's called Glad You're Here. In the last few years, Walker's career has taken off in amazing ways. His hit song, Fancy Like, about a date night with his wife at Applebee's, recently went 7 times platinum. He made his debut at the Grand Ole Opry just a couple of weeks ago, and he just released a brand new album called 17 Problems. This fall, he's going to be out on the Walker Hayes Unplugged Tour. You can find the dates, links to tickets on his website. We have linked to that, his Instagram, and the book all in the show notes. Huge thanks to Walker for sharing his story. I also love hearing how these stories impact you. My friend Dylan sent me this message after listening to page 246. He said, I was at the gym yesterday listening to the Rebecca Alba episode. I know you gave a warning about the content, but you needed a second warning that if you're at the gym acting tough, wait until you're home to listen. By the time I got to my truck, the tears were rolling down my face. Great job bringing glory to God. Great reminders of who he is, even in our hardest times. Dylan, thank you for sharing that. And boy, if you haven't listened to Rebecca's story yet, you are going to want to hear it. It's page 246 of The Unfolding. Maybe keep a box of Kleenex handy for that one. I'd love to hear what episode has been meaningful to you. Your feedback puts so much gas in my tank. So send me a message at The Unfolding Podcast on Facebook or Instagram. Thanks to the team that helps make every episode of The Unfolding possible. Michael Shermack and our producer and network director, Jason Rackow. The Unfolding is part of Faith Podcasts. You can hear more inspiring stories at myfaithpodcasts.com. We'll be back next week with another page of The Unfolding.